I think it was in 1938 that I last appeared on this platform. So nearly 11 years have passed and I have not been able to visit this center for various reasons. And having come this time for however short a time, I am of course much impressed by the growth of the work, by the increase of those who have become devoted to the philosophy and religion of Vedanta, and those who have made these philosophies the guiding principle of their life. We who have dedicated ourselves to this cause cannot but feel a thrill of pleasure whenever we find anyone taking to this great philosophy. It is not because of the zeal of propaganda that we feel so, but because we feel that this is the philosophy for the present day, whether in the East or in the West. In saying so, I am not being in any sense sectarian, because as all of you know, Vedanta philosophy stands for the principles that underlie the spiritual being and the spiritual growth of every living thing, nay, of everything that exists. Had it not been unlimited in its acceptance of all truth, Vedanta would have been of little use in solving the problems of mankind at this day. As it is a happy thing that in very ancient time in India, there lived some men and women who, through many, many centuries, some say even through 2000 years, investigated into the truths of the highest reality, into the truth of the essence of everything that exists. And through such investigation, they came to the knowledge of certain principles which they, in rapturous language, announced to their own disciples. Those things, as you know, have been embodied in those ancient texts called the Upanishads, which form the original texts of the Vedanta philosophy and religion. And anyone who has read these texts have found, they read as modern as eternity itself. There is no dogma attached to any of these statements. The emphasis is continually on experience, which is of course the keynote of modern thought. Because without experience, you cannot indeed be sure of anything. Faith is wonderful, belief also is wonderful. But they fall far short of that wonder which comes from direct experience of any truth or reality. So we have inherited in Vedanta those priceless researches of these ancient sages, but I don't think I should emphasize this word ancient so much, because although these are ancient, they have been corroborated throughout the ages by men and women who have again and again confirmed these truths by their own personal experience. And in this age too, there have been men and women in India, no doubt in other parts of the world, who have, through their own personal perception, have come to realize that these truths are indeed basic to the very foundation of one's own being. This morning, the subject that has been chosen for discussion is probably the most basic of all the truths that Vedanta emphasizes. The subject is, do not seek God, but just see Him. These words fall more or less a certain utterance of Swami Vivekananda, which no doubt many of you have read in that book which is called Inspired Talks. Those talks are notes taken by a disciple when Swami Vivekananda lived with a group in Thousand Island Park in 1895. He stayed with them for nearly 2 months. And I remember when, as a student of a high school, I first read this book, and I came across that sentence. It is put there, do not seek him, just see him. I was thrilled. I was at first a little shocked, I have to confess that. Because you must admit this is the most extreme statement, and certainly an expectation to which few of us can rise. Do not seek him, just see him. And yet it is probably of the very foundation of all spiritual knowledge and spiritual growth. I see it is an extreme statement because I think it should form the conclusion of all our spiritual efforts rather than the beginning. We seek and we seek, and having sought him, we gradually come to have glimpses of his being as from a great distance. And then we come closer and closer to this vision, and when we stand face to face with him, we can say, we do not have to seek him anymore, because we are seeing him. Even then it is said that it is not given to all mortals to continue to enjoy this vision uninterruptedly. Those of you who have read the texts on Vedanta probably remember a discussion about samadhi. Samadhi is that state of meditation where meditation has reached its own culmination, where the meditator, that is to say, the person meditating, begins to perceive at first his unity with the object of his meditation, which of course is God, and afterwards his own identity with him. This realization is called samadhi. Yet it is said in the books that even after one has attained to this state called samadhi, he is more often than not forced to come back, unless of course he has completely lost himself in God, and then there is no return for him. Well, they are forced to come back, and you will find that many of those saints and sages whose glory we see, and whose wonderful life we read in various religious literatures of the world, many of them did not even attain to this kind of samadhi. And many, having attained to it once, came back, never to have attained it during their lifetime. And you see, therefore, that even from that state they come back, although, of course, their life becomes permanently changed. Still, they cannot enjoy the uninterrupted vision of God. And that is the last word, where you say, I see him. I do not have to seek for him, even the slightest. You can well wonder why one should be shocked by reading such a sentence in any book. Do not seek him, just see him. And yet I would like to impress upon your mind the underlying truth of this statement, because this truth, even to those who have not attained to samadhi, and I wonder if any of you have attained to it yet even to those who have not attained, even to a good state of meditation, this statement has got great significance. You see, in almost all religions, there is a practice or a certain spiritual attitude instructed. And it is this, that you begin with this assumption that you have already realized truth. Henceforth, therefore, it is up to you to live up to this assumption, to talk, to think, to feel, to will, to behave as if you are already a man of realization. Of course, some of you probably are thinking, oh yes, we know the hypocrites. We know them. And many people, more or less, are hypocrites. You see, all effort at self-improvement contains some sort of hypocrisy. It has to be so. That is to say, you have to think you are more than what you think you are. You have to really think you are better than you feel you are. Because unless you feel this way, you would not also have the impetus to go forward. So some of you might think there is a little of hypocrisy there. But in this practice, yes, there is this kind of assumption, but certainly I would not use this terrible word hypocrisy in that connection. It is as if you take your whole being and tear it apart, and then you adjust all these parts in an entirely different pattern. You take your bodily behavior, you take your appetites, your emotions, your modes of thinking, your desires, everything you take apart. Your sense perception, your consciousness, and then you rearrange them after the pattern of direct spiritual experience of God. Sometimes I must admit that such a path is probably prescribed for the strong souls. Now do not get this idea that by strong souls I necessarily mean those who have attained to a high degree of spiritual perfection and therefore they have become necessarily strong. I mean, there are certain temperaments, stubborn temperaments, who do not give up, and who, if they are convinced of the truth of something, they will hold on to it. Even if the whole world were to go to pieces, they will never let it go until they have fully realized it. Yes, there are such strong souls, and I sometimes wonder what prevents every one of us becoming such a strong soul. My philosophy tells me that even in the weakest moment of my life, I contain infinite strength within myself. If Vedanta teaches anything, it teaches that above everything else. Nayam atma balahinena labhya. This self cannot be realized by one who is devoid of strength. No one has ever realized the infinite until he himself has become infinite. Can you tell me how you are going to contain the infinite God within your own heart until you have yourself made your heart infinite? And you see, you could not become infinite until you have plucked everything that is finite and petty and small from your own being and thrown it mercilessly away. Yes, I admit, this is a path meant for the strong. But you see, it is not impossible for us to practice, at least in certain parts, this path. And I shall tell you why it has to be for the strong. You see, we are being, as it were, swept away by a current. What is that current? Is it because we belong to the common herd? Therefore, when we see the flock going one way, we also bleat and go along? Is it because of that? Or is it because we have inherited something from our own individual past which is relentless in its drive upon our own being and pushes us forward along, as it were, an appointed path? We don't know. I am myself, after being in this business for so many years, have become a little less sure of all the theories and things. You see, our being is something so indefinite. You see, it is not like a material thing which you can measure and which you can draw on a drawing board, for which you can say definite things. So many ways you can explain the same phenomenon of our existence. However, probably it is our own past. Probably the very same past has made us a fellow being with other beings of the same nature. Maybe there is something in the whole of nature which is against us. Those of you who have read teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, You remember he often used to speak to the devotees of the two different powers of God. One taking downwards and another taking upwards. One tending towards bondage and another tending towards liberation. Hindus are bold enough to admit that both these powers belong to God. They are not afraid about the reputation of God. Yes, good God is very good. He is very good. But you see, he is not good after our own estimation. That's the trouble. What we call evil is also part of his goodness. However, that is not the point of discussion this morning. But you see, that is also said that life itself, this existence itself, is made of a texture in which there is a good deal of bondage for us. Well, whatever the reason, we are just being swept on and we do not have any time to stop and listen. If we could do that, I am sure the problem of life will become much easier. You know what is our great difficulty? It is that we have no time to think. I am not saying that in the ordinary sense, that men are very busy earning their livelihood and attending to their infinite duties, and therefore they do not have any time to think philosophical thoughts or spiritual thoughts. I am speaking even at the time of sleep, even when he is seemingly resting, he doesn't have any rest. Every moment something is pushing him on to the next moment. He cannot stand still and judge. He cannot look around and see where he is. I think it is in reference to this state of man that in one of the Upanishads we find one ancient teacher saying, Tame vaikam janata atmanam anya vacha vimunchata amrita shesha setuhu. He said, know him, the self alone, the one self alone. Give up all other speech. This is the bridge to immortality. You see, we talk too much. That is to say, we recognize that there are too many things. And therefore we also have equivalent words. Just imagine, look at this. We have such dictionary when it comes in one volume and in thick paper. So many words. It means there are so many objects which we perceive and which we think about. Just imagine one small mind cluttered with the recognition of so many things. How can you really recognize the self, the spirit which is one alone? Tame vaikam janate atmanam. Perceive this self which is one. But perceive this self alone. Give up all other speech. You see, that is what we want. Stand still. Judge whether you are perceiving rightly. When you are looking at it, you say, yes, I am seeing it clearly. When you greet your friend in your door front, and good morning, you say, are you sure that is your friend? Are your eyes really revealing the truth of things to you? When ideas come into your mind, are you quite sure that they have any reference to any reality? When emotions wreck your heart, are you quite sure these emotions have got any truth in them? Everything has to be tested and tested and tested. Only then we can be sure of some validity of what we think, what we feel, and what we do. You might say, that's an extreme view. You will say, yes, we know this philosophical view. We know what you Vedantists say. You say this world is unreal. But that's rather extreme. Yes, one day probably we shall realize this world is unreal. But you certainly do not expect us to take it seriously now. We have to live here. We have families. We have friends, duties. And even if we do not have all these things, there is the suffering humanity. The suffering humanity has become a big burden for our poor souls now. Too much of that kind of talk, and I might sound cynical, and I shall beg your forgiveness if I do sound so, but I am afraid that too much concern about humanity has brought humanity to practical ruin. If men would just forget other men for a little while, and just try to find themselves and know what is the truth about themselves, I'm sure they would be better for themselves as well as for others. No, people are always looking at others, taking for granted all this. And you will, I'm sure, say, oh no, we cannot forget those things. One of the criticisms leveled against this so-called extreme philosophy of Vedanta is this, that it forgets the suffering humanity. This criticism I have heard. But you see, the whole thing is based on confusion. You really do not know. You really do not know. Do you know? You read all the learned books and they will tell you how you gain knowledge. And let me assure you, because I have turned some of those pages, they do not know what they are talking about. Then none of them agree with anyone. None of them can say they definitely know. They will cut your theory to pieces, always fearing that their theories also will be cut to pieces by others. None of them have come to any conclusion. Yet this is one of the supreme claims of all mystical religions, and particularly Vedanta, because it is through and through established on the experiences in the superconscious plane. We have accepted that as a necessary thing. And you will find this is the claim there, that one can have another kind of perception, a truer perception, a correct perception. You see, until you have that, you do not really know. You take for granted. There is one statement made in one of the Upanishads. It's a very well-known text, and oftentimes it is quoted. And our authors also have dwelt upon this. Ahara shuddho sattva shuddhi, sattva shuddho dhruva smriti. There is a method shown by which one can attain to steady memory. Now this is the literal translation of this expression, dhruva smriti. Smriti means recollection or memory. Dhruva means steady. That is to say, that there would not be any doubt about it or any break about it or any change about it. Why is it called memory or recollection? Because our authors think as if we ought to have remembered our own true nature, which is spiritual, and we have, as it were, have forgotten it, and we now regain that lost memory. Memory is not really meant here to be just a thought, but actual perception. But how do you gain this? When your being has become shuddham, that is to say pure. Sattva Shuddhi it is called. The purification of being. When our being has become pure, then we gain this eternal memory or eternal perception. But how do we purify our own being? And there it is said, Ahara Shuddhi, purification of food. The commentators have explained this text in different ways. And Swami Vivekananda says that all these different ways could be included together. For example, the great commentator Ramanuja was a devotee. He emphasized when he spoke of purification of food, he emphasized the external food, that is to say, which we habitually eat. And he said this food should be pure. And he shows in his commentary how there are several kinds of impurities in the food. And if we are careful about those things, eventually our being will become purified. Shankara, however, who is a little more subtle than Ramanuja, he said that food here means food is that which is taken within. And actually this Sanskrit word lends itself to such a meaning. Ahara means gathering within, or you just gather, you take from the outside and put inside. It could be the usual food, or it could be anything that you take within. And you know, just as there are food by which this body is nourished, so there is a food by which the senses and the mind and our heart and our consciousness are being nourished. And those things are certainly more important food than the food we eat in our dinner table. And Shankara says, purify all these things that you take in through the senses and through your mind and consciousness. And how do you do it? That is where the great struggle comes. I say, you take for granted You look at a tree, say, yes, I am seeing a tree. You meet someone, yes, this is my friend. But do you ever stop and ask, who is this whom I call my friend? What is this which I call a tree? Have you asked yourself? Now, if you would ask yourself, calmly and quietly, and analyze this experience which you call seeing a tree or meeting a friend, you will be surprised to find there is no such thing as a tree and no such thing as a friend. As you can say, of course there is a friend. Your own being is friend and God is friend. But not in this ordinary sense. No. You have no proof indeed that you are perceiving a tree or perceiving a human being. Now that's, of course, I understand. That's an absurd statement. It is not. That's the puzzle. We just think, yes, I stand here, I see, yes, I see many men and women seated here, listening to me. I would take it for granted because I am being swept along. But if I stop, I shall wonder if there are indeed men and women whom I am seeing, outside of me, to whom I am speaking, who are listening to me. I shall have to doubt this. I cannot take it for granted. And I shall tell you how. Now consider this. Do you think there is anything outside of you? Anything? No. If you say, yes, there is, I see it. Of course you use that word, you see it. But all that you know is that certain things have appeared in your consciousness. Isn't it true? For example, if I say, what do you mean by that you are seeing a tree? You say, well, I am conscious of the existence of a tree, having such and such a color at such and such a distance. Yes, you are conscious of it. Every perception is consciousness. And if you think just a little, you will find that everything is perceived just because it appears in your own consciousness. If it had not appeared in your consciousness, you would not be aware of the existence of anything. Now here you are, and I say you are sitting outside of me. No, that's a wrong statement. All that I am aware of is this, that there are certain things, certain modes appearing in my own consciousness, and they give me a sense of externality, which itself also is a mode of consciousness. Think if it is not so. Now I shall put it in a simpler way. It is actually admitted that unless something is reflected in our own eye, we cannot perceive it. That's the first thing probably we'll say we know about. If a thing is not reflected there, you do not know. All then, therefore, there is some irritation in optical nerves, and there is an irritation in some brain center. And then comes an irritation in your own mind. Of course, that irritation you do not know. And a series of such irritations go on, and then comes the finished product, and you say, there is a tree. You see, if you could persuade yourself to stop, you would actually experience those things. Now, I know one argument against such a procedure. You would say, yes, we shall accept this. That is a kind of rational analysis. And maybe by such analysis you could come to such conclusion. But why should I take it for granted that that is the right thing to do? That is a sort of conditioning on my own mind. And I would not do that. Here I see living reality outside me, which gives meaning to my own existence. And you say that I have to nullify it by this stupid analysis. I won't do it. Of course you won't do it, I know it. Or do I? You see, but you will do it one day. But there is another test to it. If you submit yourself to that test, you will find it. If you could reach this state where you do not seek anything from the outside, you do not seek anything that is material, physical, you do not want to satisfy the appetites of your senses, you do not identify yourselves with any of these going on in your body and mind, I assure you, you will at once, without any analysis of reason or any kind of thing, you will at once see the whole universe floating shadow-like in your own consciousness. You will see this universe like a painted picture, two-dimensional, if I may say so. Yes, that is actual experience. These things are not just guesswork. You see, this is the trouble of it. Somehow, for some foolish reason, we have given reality to our own body. Now just ask yourself if it is not so. Why do you consider certain things to be real? Because they are after your own physical existence. Why do you think I consider gold and silver real? Why do I consider this earth real? Why do I consider other physical beings real? Just because I have, for some foolish reason, I have given utmost importance to this physical existence, which I think is mine. Can you tell me why you think that your body is very important? You know it is not so. You will admit that mind is more important than the body. You will admit this. If anybody treats you just as a mere body, as a carcass, how do you like it? I think you will feel highly insulted. And yet, you see, we have to admit in all sincerity, somehow we have given the utmost importance to our physical existence. So whatever has these three dimensions, whatever can be touched, whatever can be tasted, whatever can be heard or seen, that is real to us. There is a sort of vicious circle. You see, so it has been said in all religions that we found to be true. This is what Shankara said, purification of food as it is gathered by the senses or the mind. You analyze everything that you perceive and you set yourself right. It is not that you always reject everything. Some part of it you find to be impure and you reject it. Other parts of this food, the thing that you take in, you find to be right. Anything that you perceive by your senses, that you think with your own mind, about everything you will find there are 5 features. Everything has existence. Everything is capable of being known. Everything has some sort of attraction. It is said by our philosophers, even the most ugly thing has some sort of attraction, otherwise you would not call it ugly. Somehow we are drawn to the opposites too. That's a kind of perverted attraction, but it is a sort of attraction too. So everything that becomes known by us also has some sort of attraction about it. Everything has got a form, that is to say, it is perceivable to the senses, conceivable to the mind, and everything has got a corresponding concept in our own mind. These 5 features everything has. Shankara suggests that we drop the last 2 things. This concept that we have, because it goes without saying that our ideas are rarely correct. We might as well, for the time being, drop them until we have tested and found them right. And as regards the forms, things that we perceive with our senses or conceive with our mind, those things are also sometimes the results of our prejudice. I told you, because we give importance to the body, therefore in our perception of reality also, matter takes predominance. Now suppose we do not want to give importance to the sense objects. Suppose we also have learned to become dissociated from the body, then we shall find that the so-called form of things has become, as it were, separated from this other thing, pure existence, pure consciousness and pure joy, as we call it. So Shankara suggests that we be very careful in every perception, in every thought. We take the object of our perception and our thought and analyze it, and we understand it as it really is, pure being. When we have learned to do that, then we can stop this tremendous current by which we are being swept away, this current of ignorance. You see, this practice, which forms the subject of my discussion, can be undertaken only when we are ready to undertake this arduous task of analysis. You do not allow yourself to take anything for granted. You do not say, yes, I am seeing Mr. Smith. You cannot do that. While you are talking with him, maybe you are looking at him. Within you, your mind is analyzing this perception and setting you right. And then, when your mind has been set right simultaneously, you will be forced to admit that you are not looking at Mr. Smith, a human being, limited and so on, but you are perceiving the Spirit itself, perceiving Divine Spirit itself. Yes, practice it and see if it is not so. Practice it. Just try to dissociate the form from the being of everything that you perceive, everything that you think of. You must admit the form continually changes. You have seen this person as a child. You have seen this person as a grown-up man. You have seen his mind changing. All these changes you have seen. Your reason tells you these changes have not taken place suddenly, but have gone on continually, from moment to moment. You know that similar changes have been taking place within you. And you know that you yourself, your own identity, however, has remained the same. In everyone there is an identity, unchanging identity, that is the spirit and the being of man. But his body and mind continually change, therefore he cannot be the same. So in this peculiar situation we say, body and mind which are destructible, they cannot belong to that which is pure identity which never changes and therefore eternal and immortal. That is the true man. And you also begin to think about everyone in this respect. You say, everyone is really the Divine Spirit. I am the Divine Spirit. You think of yourself also in the same term because you have to work on both these planes simultaneously. You could not say, oh, I shall begin to think myself, I shall continue to think myself as I am, and yet I shall perceive others as Divine Spirit. No, you cannot. The two are the obverse and reverse of the same coin, the two sides of the same coin. If you want to take one side, you'll have to take the other side also. You couldn't take one side and leave the other side untouched. You couldn't do it. You take both. Well, so you have to change both simultaneously. You change your own idea of yourself and you change your idea of others continually. Check and recheck. Well, I know this is a kind of head-splitting business. When you start thinking in that way, at first it seems that your brain is about to blow off. But don't be afraid, brain has wonderful capacity. Do you know that? Now I know people get frightened. They say, well, one should not think too much of God. One should go off head. But you don't. You see, one goes off head because he thinks of other things than God. That is what creates the trouble. Yes, even when we are thinking of God, you see, we do not think of God always. Oftentimes other thoughts come into our mind, and that's what causes trouble. Well, you go on, at first a bit cautiously. That has to be on the cautious side. But continue it. Don't let this mode of thought relax for a single moment. Don't let it relax. And I assure you, within a few years you will find you have become a changed person. You will actually feel that you are the disembodied spirit. You have nothing to do with this body. I do not mean you begin to float in the air. Go out of the body. You see, that is what they think. They think when they separate from the body, they have some sort of light form and they can hover in the air and peek through windows and go here and go there. You know that's an illogical thought, because when you lose your sense of the body, you become formless. And to the extent that you succeed in becoming that, you do not have any interest in finding what will happen in the future, what is happening now, who is eating or who is dreaming or who is sleeping, whose house has caught fire and all kinds of, not the slightest interest, because they all belong to this order of reality, this ignorant order. But when you reach that state, you live in another plane of truth, and you don't do any kind of things like that. Even when you are moving or seeing, you continually feel that you haven't got any body. If somebody asks your name, you have to think a little before you can remember your name. If they ask how many years old you are, you have to think about it. It does not come instinctively. You do not know whether you are a man or woman. You believe it? Then you don't believe it. Spirit is neither man nor woman. You actually feel it that way, neither old nor young. I hope I am not giving you this impression that the spirit is some abstraction. No. It is all of reality, therefore it is called infinite being. It is all of truth, therefore it is called infinite consciousness. It is all of joy and love and beauty, therefore it is called infinite bliss. It is the whole of reality. There is nothing. There is not any single value, worthwhile value, which is not realized in it to an infinite degree. You see, we actually begin to perceive it within yourself, in others. You begin to feel a sense of timelessness. You walk 20 miles, it seems as if you have just covered 2 or 3 miles. Time sense, space sense, all these things begin to diminish. And eventually you realize a state where you can truly say, yes, I have gone beyond death. I have attained to immortality. There is a beautiful line in one of these old Vedantic texts. There is an instruction given for the realization of this truth. It is said there, Bhuteshu bhuteshu vichinta dhiraha prityasmallokad amrita bhavanti. The wise ones, the steady ones, having contemplated this spirit, which I just now described, as infinite being, consciousness, joy, having contemplated this being in every form, the wise go beyond this world, that is to say this relative world, and thereby become immortal. It does not mean that they die as we understand death to be, but they rise above the plane of death. Yes, there is such a plane. There is a place where you come and you can say, here I leave death behind, and here I enter into the realm of immortality. Just as sometimes you climb a high mountain and you come to the belt of clouds, you pass through these clouds, and then you rise above this level of clouds, and then you find perpetual sunshine, and you have left the clouds behind. In exactly the same way you perceive that death has been left behind. The perception is so clear, so definite, that you could almost look at your watch and say, it is at this moment I have gone beyond death. And why should it not be so? You see, in our present self-consciousness, death and immortality are mixed up. The body is dead, mind is dead. They represent death because they are continually dying. The great Buddha was absolutely right when he said that everything is momentary. Everything is just momentary. We die every moment. Instead of saying that we live every moment, we might as well say we die every moment. The last moment, this past moment, it is dead and gone. Our life lived in that moment, dead and gone, never to be called back again. So this body and mind which continually change, which are subject to space and time and causality, they represent death, that is death. And through ignorance, you see, we who do not change, our identical being, the sense of identity which we have, which makes us say, oh, I was born so many years ago in such and such part of India. Oh, I went to college there and I came to this country in such and such a year. This sense of identity which we have, that is the immortal being, the pure spirit, our true self. But somehow, through some confusion, the two have become mixed up in our thought, as regards ourselves as well as everything else. And therefore, we are subject to death. We feel we are also mortal. Suppose you have reached that disembodied state. Suppose you have reached that state where you can dissociate name and form from the true being. Then, of course, you realize yourself not as this body or mind, but as pure spirit. And therefore, the moment you begin to feel it, this separation, you also feel you have become immortal. It is not impossible. This is what Shankara says, purification of Frood. Now, of course, all these things I have told you in a rambling fashion, I hope has impressed your mind with this fact that you cannot rest complacent with your present state of thinking and feeling and acting. You cannot if you have any grain of reason in you. And I am afraid you have got plenty of reason. I am afraid because reason is very uncomfortable. It makes you think. It doesn't allow you to have any rest. I told you of this practice where you try to perceive this being, this divine being in everything. And when you try to perceive it, you feel as if your whole being will explode. And why should it not? Just consider our bodily makeup. Everything in our body, every cell is being molded by our present mode of consciousness, what we think of ourselves. That is what has given the form to our nerves, to our brain cells. That is what is making our blood flow in our veins in a certain way. And when we change this consciousness, this thought of ours, you see, body feels first of all this impact. You will find every cell in your brain has to struggle to adapt itself to this new mode of consciousness and thought. Every particle of your nerve has to do that. Even your bone becomes changed afterward. Everything changes. If you observe your own bodily function, when your thoughts change, you will know it. When a person gets angry, you know how his blood flows into his face. His face gets red. Blood always changes with the mode of our consciousness and thought. As a matter of fact, everything changes. You can see, it is such a revolutionary way of thinking that we cannot but feel a sort of explosiveness in our own being when we try to think about it. But persist. Persist in this. Take for granted you are actually seeing the truth. Yes, you are seeing the truth. You could not see anything else. You could ask the Vedantists to say, this world is unreal, God alone is real. And you look at this world and you ask him, now do you think this is unreal? And he says, this is unreal, and you tell him, how can it be? If I perceive it, how can it be unreal? And I shall back you. You see, if you want to make the Vedantist uncomfortable, you see, you ask him this question. Well, now Vedanta is a clever man. You see, he has thought about those things. He has experienced many of those things. So the answer that he will give you is this. He will say, yes, I also see this world, only I won't call it by that name. What do you mean by this world? Well, sun and moon and stars and planets and mountains and seas and trees and birds and beasts and men and maybe gods, the devils too. Well, you would say all those things. Well, what do you find them to be? I find them to be pure spirit. Yes, whatever you perceive is the real. If you perceive, you think a tree, that is the reality. And since there is just one reality, God, it is up to you to correct your own conclusion. Don't come to this conclusion that you are seeing a tree. That is where you make the mistake. Everything is truth. Brahman is truth, the world is truth. Only, of course, you should perceive it rightly. It is no fault of mine if you mistake me for something else than I am. Of course, that is wrong. There's something wrong with your own perception and thought. I cannot be blamed for that. Everything is indeed divine. Why are you thinking of those things wrongly? You should perceive these things rightly. And now, stop and look at this world and remind yourself, now, what am I really seeing? Am I seeing matter and so on and so forth? And am I really seeing God Himself? If you have been convinced by the teachings of the Vedanta philosophy, you have studied those things, thought about those things, you have discussed these things with people who have studied them before, practiced them before, and you have been convinced there is just only one reality, divine reality, and then you look at these and you find these things to be real, trees and birds and beasts and so on and so forth, you should stop and ask yourself, maybe I am not seeing things rightly. Rub your eyes. Focus your eyes right. There is somewhere some confusion. Somewhere the thought is getting blurred. Somewhere God Himself is presenting Himself to your senses. But your senses are muffled. Is not carrying this message to your mind rightly. It is said by many mystics that reach a state where everything they see, everything they touch or hear, that is to say the object of sense perception, appears to them pure God Himself and nothing but God. There was once a very great saint in northern India. She was a queen, and maybe some of you know her name. Mirabai was her name. And she was a born devotee of Sri Krishna, even from a child. And although when she was married to a king, she didn't live the life of a householder. The king found her rather embarrassing because she didn't have the sense of behaving like a queen. And she would spend all her time in a chapel dedicated to Sri Krishna, worshipping Him, singing to Him, dancing to Him. Devotees would come, she will sing the glory of the Lord with them. The king became highly scandalized. Well, however, we are not concerned with her life story. But she was also a great poet. Beautiful things she wrote. Most of them were songs. And here is one song she wrote. She describes a state of mind in which the heart has become disconsolate for the Lord. And in that state, she is not able to distinguish natural phenomena from the very personality of God Himself. You know, you might think, well, we can understand that kind of condition. It's an emotional, under emotional stress, somehow things get mixed up. Yes, that is true. But also in this spiritual state, there comes a state where you find what you consider to be honest, natural phenomena, they begin to change their face. And she says in one of these songs, she says, my eyes are tearful and heart is hungry for Him. It is raining, raining hard, and the fragrance of the flower is being wafted into the room. But is it the fragrance of the flower or the fragrance of the person of my beloved? You see, fragrance comes from the garden. Her common sense says it is the fragrance of the flowers, but she feels it is the fragrance of the person of the beloved. You might think that's very good poetry, but you see, the devotees have not said so. There are 4 songs she wrote describing the ecstasies of the soul from the first stage, second stage, third, and the fourth stage. Fourth stage, of course, is the culmination. And this one, which I briefly translated for you, represents the first stage of the soul in its realization of divinity. Yes, a stage will come when you will find. You will look with these eyes, and instead of seeing the accustomed thing, In and through their forms you will begin to see the effulgent being of God shining. You cannot believe it unless you have at least got a glimpse of this truth. It is as it from time to time somebody rolls off a screen from the face of the earth, and there is no longer this dead, passive earth staring you in the face. Mostly dead, because mostly material it is. Instead of that, you begin to perceive the throbbing, real being of God still in your heart. You catch a glimpse of it, and again, as it were, the curtain drops, and you have lost this vision. You see, in this way you will find this strange crust that we have built round ourselves. It breaks, and our being becomes fluid and mobile, flexible. It no longer is caught in the vice of custom. You see the way our senses function in this limited way. Do you think that is what the senses should do? There is no reason to think that our eyes should only perceive thus far and no further. I look at the face of a person. Yes, I see some expression in his face. But if he is clever enough in hiding his internal feelings, I cannot guess what is going on within his heart. So blind are my eyes. Why do you think that my sense of vision should be so blunt? No. When your heart has become pure, when you have attained to the purity of being, and you attain to it when you refuse to accept anything within yourself which is ignorant or incorrect, from this moment on, you tell yourself, no, all that is God. All that I perceive is real. God alone is real, therefore I am perceiving God. And if I find somehow I am not perceiving God, I shall force myself to perceive rightly. If you have come before me and tell me, look at me, Swami, I am so and so, don't you see me? And I shake my head, and I focus my eyes and try to see you correctly. It is in the same way as it were we have become convinced there is just only one being to perceive, and that is God. And somehow there is somewhere a twist in the instrument of perception in our senses, in our mind, in our consciousness. And we force all these things to act rightly. That is the practice. Do not seek Him, just see Him.